For watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
A very good evening to you and welcome to this special Teachers Talk Radio show sponsored by Pocket Talk. We are here this evening to talk to you about the future of inclusive education. We're looking at how we can use AI enhanced translation technology to support our multilingual students throughout their school experience. I am one of your hosts this evening. My name is Darren Lester. In case you have not encountered me on Teachers Talk Radio before, I am a head of classics. I'm a teacher of MFL. I speak 9 languages in total, so this is a real passion of mine. And I host the Saturday morning breakfast show here at Teachers Talk Radio, as well as the MFL Journal Club. I am joined this evening by my host, James, who, as long as I'm pointing in the right direction, is on that side of me. James, hello.
Hello and good evening. It's lovely to be here this evening. Well, a lovely bank holiday I had, and I'm really excited about tonight. So I'm James Robin, one of the hosts of Teachers Talk Radio, and I'm really coming from an EdTech perspective and AI perspective. I'm really interested in the accessibility, inclusive nature, and can't wait to get into this Pocket Talks. It looks like a fantastic opportunity to really support our multilingual students.
Absolutely. And we are joined this evening, very thankful to be joined by 2 fantastic guests who are going to talk to us about Pocket Talk and about how Pocket Talk is used in practice. We have got Jess from Pocket Talk. Jess, good evening to you.
Thanks, Darren. Hi, all. Yeah, so I'm Jess. I work for Pocket Talk. I look after Pocket Talk in Europe. So Pocket Talk is a global business, but I think we'll focus a lot on what we see in the UK and Europe this evening. I've been with Pocket Talk a couple of years now. We've had a big focus, I'd say, for the last 18 months specifically in education, which is, I think, why this is a real passion topic of mine. And I think working with, Kaylee and other schools and teachers, we're really now starting to, I think, step away from, do schools need it, and start to understand a little bit more about why we have the conversation in the first place. And I think, we're really advocating to open up this conversation generally.
That's brilliant. That's something that I'm really looking forward to doing this evening. So Jess, thank you for coming along. We appreciate it. And we have Kaylee. Good evening to you, Kaylee.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I don't have a portfolio as amazing as 9 languages. Barely speaking sometimes. I'm an English teacher and Deputy Senko at a small school in Batley in West Yorkshire. It's really excited to get into this. Really excited. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. Do you know what? As fascinating as SEND issues are, I could not be a Senko. I don't have that, the organizational stuff that you need to be able to manage everything that role involves. So, my language
is a big role. It is a big role. I mean, I still teach English predominantly throughout the week. My role as a Senko is a TLR, but this is where Pocket Talk's been amazing, because I'm not going to be coming from it totally from an EL angle today. I'll be able to hopefully speak a little bit more about how we can get these translators to help with some of our learners with SEND as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. I love how, because sort of in the conversations we've been having, how broad this whole topic seems to be. And I think our listeners, no matter kind of what angle they're coming from, everybody will be able to take something out of this evening, which is really exciting. So I'm going to start by kind of laying my cards out on the table. As any of my social media followers will know, I've had a bad 2 weeks with AI. I had my data scraped last week. I did. I did. I had some writing scripts. It was uploaded onto a torrent, deliberately to be downloaded for generative AI. And so I kind of, at that point, I fell off the bandwagon. I was a proponent. I was really happy. And then I realized that I didn't get paid for the work that I had stolen. So now I'm less happy. So one of the things that I'm excited about today is kind of the three of you really convincing me to get back on board, because I want to be excited again, because like Jess said at the beginning, this is a huge topic in education at the moment. It's something that we're talking about all of the time in all of the training that you go to. There's always an AI stream. And so I think it is a really good thing for us to talk about. And of course, in the language teaching community in particular, it remains really controversial. You know, we know that translation tools themselves are controversial. We've all had the students who have handed in, I'm not going to drop any brand names, but things run through translators that maybe they shouldn't have been run through, and you read them and they don't make sense because there was a typo in the English. And so I kind of, when we were talking about this to begin with, I came in thinking, I'm going to go in open-minded. I want to know about this because I want to know how this can be used properly. Because I think one thing that a lot of linguists are scared of is this idea that we will be replaced by these tools. You know, that our children will start thinking, oh, we don't need to learn Mandarin anymore because I can just use Pocket Talk to do it for me. And I think what we have to do in the MFR community is almost take a step backwards and see it not as a pedagogical tool, but as an equality and equity tool. Right. And I think, you know, because that's how we're framing the show today. And I think that's the way.
That's exactly, it's not just the way we frame the show, but I think it's largely the way we frame our business. Okay. You know, so I think that's probably a really good place to start, because I agree with you. And actually, you know, I talk about this a lot on my own socials. You know, this isn't about replacing brilliant people. I think, you know, let's start with, I don't know if anyone's ever met a professional translator, but it's got to be, you know, in the caliber of one of the most impressive skill sets you'll ever see. To hear and speak simultaneously, you know, that the goal is not to replace that. The goal is not to even remotely come close to removing that as a need. I think what we see is that the demand for translation is simply bigger than the supply that we have today of human people who are capable of doing it. And I think that's probably the number one thing I talk about, and even more broadly than education. Outside of education, we work with healthcare, we work with public safety. You know, there will always be conversations that I think always will be done by people. I think
just to touch on that.
Absolutely.
I think another thing that we're doing is we're trying to make sure that we don't just see language as one thing. The language is not just words. It's a multifaceted concept which displays communication in lots of ways, whether that's symbols, whether that's sounds, whether that's words. And I, as an advocate of Pocket Talk and as someone who is using it in school, we're absolutely not replacing the communication and the language. We are simply just allowing it to be a tool which our children are actually graduating from, but we're seeing it as a tool in a classroom to help just get through some of those barriers, to include everyone, to have an inclusive education. We have to prepare our teachers and our staff that they will walk into a school and there will be children with SEND, there will be children who are EAL. And if this can be one of those tools that just helps the burden from a teacher that little bit more to because they're so user friendly as well, but just a tool that can help, a resource that can help just have a little less barriers and more inclusivity. I think we have to be careful that we're not coming at it from an angle of it's language is just words. It doesn't
replace the French language teacher. It's not to be used to learn, you know, that's not what it's for. I think I think, Kaylee, that's you. When I hear you talk about Pocket Talk, I always think I wish I could just bring you everywhere, because ultimately you talk about it in a way that makes so much sense. And I think it is as simple as that. If a child's in the classroom and they don't know where the bathroom is, or they don't know that lunchtime's about to start, or they don't know that their parents will come and get them at the end of the day, I think, the academic debate around, large language models in those scenarios is just less of a barrier to overcome, because ultimately at that point, you just need to be able to say something and you need to be understood. And you want to be able to understand what that child is saying as well. And we sort of talked about it just a minute ago before the show started, but a lot of this demand is in the younger school ages, where, to Kaylee's point, it's not about having a Pocket Talk for life. You can graduate from it. You should graduate from it, but it will at least allow you to build some rapport with your classmates or your teacher, or know what I'm supposed to do. And I think, to go back to the original point, Darren, I think if every school could have a translator, they would and they should. It's just not possible. And so what can we offer that schools can afford and that schools can reuse? I think it's not just about that, this podcast. That is very much how we think about it generally all of the time.
And I think before we get into Pocket Talk and how that can help, let's explore that state of the nation a little bit more. And we started conversation just before we were on air, but we start with that reality of many schools, what they're facing at the moment. And we were saying the last census, 21% of pupils were recorded as having first language known or believed to be other than English. And that's already an increase, and it's going up and up. And you were sharing statistics a second ago, Jess, about primary school age. And while that brings a rich diversity to our classroom, it also presents a real everyday challenge for our pupil, or for our teachers, really, from lesson planning to pupil engagement, how it can stretch and resource, and the patience of that communication and that access. So I'll ask, have you noticed this shift in school? And Kaylee, I want to start with you. And what does it really mean for you on the ground as well?
So I have been a teacher since 2019, and all the schools and environments that I've worked in, EAL has always been there. It's always been there. It's not something that's new. It's not something that's suddenly come to light. The research and the academics that have gone into EAL has always been there. The school that I currently work at on paper is 49.9% EAL. And you could argue that it's our parents that sometimes can't even access the form correctly. So they're writing that they're EAL because they speak maybe Urdu at home, but when they come to school, their children are in school, they speak English. I think on a personal level, it was 2022 where I was really hit with, oh my gosh, I have a handful of Key Stage 4 learners who are about to start their GCSE English Literature and Language course. And it was in 2022, and I thought, do I really know how to get these boys? I work in a boys' school. Do I really know how to get these boys to access this subject? They'd come to the UK. Some of them were asylum seekers, refugees. Some of them, their families came for economic opportunities, and some of them had never even been in school before. And then because their age was 14, they were shoved straight into year 9, straight into year 10. And we were starting our GCSE course. So in 22, I was really trialed with the barriers, and I had to make sure that I was exposing them as much as possible to English, but also trying to use, don't want to also name anything, but also trying to use a particular translating device to get across maybe certain themes. So in Macbeth, what's ambition in Albanian? Okay, I'll find that out, and then I'll use an icon, and I started dual coding. And again, I wasn't reinventing the wheel. It was stuff that was already there, but I really had to sit and carefully plan. And sometimes 5 lessons worth of Macbeth was taking me hours to plan, because I had to have something in Afghanistan, had to have something in Albanian, had to make sure that my learners in class already who struggle with English were also getting the same amount of attention. So that's really where the barrier came. Now, I feel quite lucky that the school that I work in, we are a very diverse school. Our staff speak lots of different languages. but this, like what we were saying before, this is how we use our pedagogy, how we use our teaching and learning to really establish how to get learners engaged in a classroom. And using snippets of their language on my PowerPoints and in their books, most importantly, was representative. I wanted learners to know that I was trying to, speak a different language, or that I was trying to learn certain words. And it became a conversation and a dialogue in itself of, oh, well, this, sorry, I've just got distracted by the banner. We started looking at the root words of things as well. So we started looking at, oh, well, if this is what it means in Albanian, does that word sound similar to our word? And we were looking at it from that. So it opened a huge discourse and dialogue and represented children in the classroom. I hope that answers the question. Sorry.
No, I think it really does. And I think someone was really interested. How many different languages were there in your class then?
I mean, in the school, we have over 30 languages, or we have had at some point. I can't say right this moment we have over 30, but we have had over 30 languages. I mean, in a class day to day, we have learners who speak Arabic, Urdu, maybe some sort of Eastern European language, whether that's Romanian, Hungarian, Hungarian and Bulgarian. We have a myriad of languages all the time, and it's wonderful. We have to celebrate this diversity. They also bring a lot to our classrooms, and we can't just keep talking about it as if it's a burden on the teacher and the teacher has to work super hard, which is already what I've said. But we have to make sure that we are establishing that they bring a lot to our classrooms as well. They bring their culture, their diversity, their different languages, and they start teaching us things too. So it's important that we like I keep saying, we represent that diversity, that we've tried to find a deeper communication more than just in words sometimes.
Yeah, and I wonder, how do you think it challenges then the student confidence and that classroom dynamic? You've said that language is more than just words, and that's what we've got to get across. But do you think there is something about the confidence levels of pupils coming in even midway through the year, or with parents who are struggling with navigating, even you said filling out forms and things like that? Have you seen that dynamic as a real key factor within your classrooms?
Yeah, definitely. It does lower self-esteem and confidence. And again, that's the role of a teacher, to find those gaps, to plug those gaps, and to make them feel like they belong in that classroom. The children often that I work with have come from tricky circumstances. They've come from deprived backgrounds, and what we were talking about earlier is a lot of these are then starting nursery, whereas in the ones as a secondary school teacher, what I'm seeing is, 15-year-old boys who haven't been able to pick up a pen before, 14-year-old boys who have never been able to communicate with an English speaker. So that's the kind of stuff. I don't want to say it's more complex, because I do think that when you have a nursery age child who's learning multiple languages, they never fully develop one language enough. But it definitely does harness self-esteem. But we as a school, we have lots of ways to celebrate. We have a wonderful reward system. We have a really positive discipline system. So they're able to get on board with that, because nobody's left behind with the reward systems that we put in place.
Excellent. I know Paul's put a comment here that I think will lead us really nicely into the next question, of class including lots of different languages, Urdu, Nigerian, Polish and Chinese, looking for a miracle. So I think perfect opportunity for Darren to lead on to the next bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, as Kaylee was talking, I was thinking about a time that I taught RS to an ESOL class. And again, it was a small school. I only had about 4 or 5 different languages in the class, fortunately, all of which I spoke. So that did make it easier. But I remember doing Bible passages with them and handing out worksheets that had the passage in simplified English, and then in each of the 4 or 5 languages underneath, to try and save myself some time. But now, as I think about it in terms of like cognitive load and cognitive overload, what that must have been like for those children to have English as their foreign language, then a whole bunch of languages that they didn't speak, and then trying to find their own. So I think it's interesting. Before I actually move on to what is our real next question, I think, Jess, what I would like to know from you is what actually is a Pocket Talk? Because I realise we've been talking about Pocket Talk for about 20 minutes, and I don't think we've actually explained what one looks like, what it is, what the actual device that we're talking about is.
Let's do that. I have to say, a minute ago when that question came up and Paul said he was looking for a miracle, James, I genuinely thought you were going to say, what a way to introduce Jess and her. And I thought, you know what? I will never again be introduced after my miracle again.
Well, that was the aim. That's what I was trying to set up.
Jess
So now it's your moment, Jess. What miracle can you give us, and Paul?
Well, Pocket Talk, I think. So Pocket Talk as a business, our mission is to remove language barriers. Our sole focus is to leverage large language models and AI to remove those language barriers in classrooms for sure, but generally as well. I think interestingly, fun story about the business, it actually started as a consumer device. And, you know, as someone that's certainly used it on holidays to order dinners or get directions or order a margarita, it does work for that. But it was COVID where the business changed because, of course, we just had all of these devices and nobody traveling. And so we actually donated hundreds of devices. We donated them to schools, we donated them to the NHS, we donated them to first responders because we really wasn't sure what would become of it. And actually, it was an overwhelmingly positive response where people were sort of coming back saying, can we have more? You know, we never know who is going to be in front of us and we do need to communicate them. And this is actually providing us a really simple way to do it. Now, many generations on from that, this is what a Pocket Talk looks like. So the Pocket Talk device itself is a really smart, sleek, sort of looks a little bit like a smaller version of a mobile phone. And the way that it works is you choose a language. I mean, Kaylee sort of referenced it's quite simple. You click on here. You've got more than 92 languages that you can choose. You choose your language. And at that point, I speak into the device and it will translate into the language I've chosen.
Und es übersetzt in die von mir gewählte Sprache.
In that case, it was German. And then, of course, the person, Darren, I'd probably come to you here, given that you know more language than all of us put together. But of course, then the person who was speaking that language would be able to reply. I can read it, I can hear it, I can repeat it. You know, there's lots of other quite nice functionality built into that. But at a high level, that's what we do. We use technology to speak and understand in other languages.
Perfect. So, Kate, I'll come back to you then, because to me, that's actually quite a nice little device that I would be perfectly happy for a child to have on the desk, you know, and refer to when they need to. A bit like back in the day when we would do it with dictionaries. You know, that's very, very cool. How does it compare? Because you talked about using other translation methods in the past. So kind of how does Pocket Talk compare to some of those that you've done?
Yeah, so first of all, I obviously working in a secondary school, having something that looks like a phone, you can imagine that there are a couple of eyebrows raised and a couple of children, oh, he's got his phone. And I think straight away what we had to do was be very transparent about what they were. Do you want to have a go at it? Shall we see what it looks like? And just made everyone aware of what they were and who they were for, and showing that equitable system. Jess has shown the translating device like that. Now, I'll be honest, we use that in school, but actually there's a camera device to it, which we as a school use a lot more. So if you can see, there's a little camera there. Now, what's amazing about that device is I can give a worksheet, or we can have a PowerPoint on the board, and the camera function zooms in, takes a picture, and in real time gives you a physical translation of that. Now, if the learner also doesn't doesn't read that language, we actually have a few children who they speak a language that they can't read. You can click on it again and it will then read it back to you. So that is the thing that's being used most, because children don't always want to speak in their first language in a room full of English speakers. They'll feel a little bit awkward sometimes speaking into it. And I think I was a little naive to that when I first started choosing the children that I wanted to work with, I kind of was like, well, why aren't you speaking into it? Forgetting how a young person might feel in a classroom speaking a different language. So it's the camera function that is used the most from the device. If it's a one-to-one case, they might use the translation, but it's the pictures more. And what's even better about the pictures is at the end of the day, they give me the Pocket Talk back. And being a true quality assured teacher that I am, I like to go through and see what pictures have been taken that day and seeing what they're getting from it. And yeah, touch wood, nothing terrible has happened. There's been no terrible pictures of anyone, which again you think could happen, but they appreciate it. And I start out with, look, we're very lucky that we have this. Not all schools get access to this. I mean, we were very I say lucky enough, but we fought for it. I was going to say,
Caitlin, I remember we did a partnership program at the end of last year, and we ran it for 8 weeks, and we kind of put it out there, and we have over 400 different schools come back to us and say, we're struggling. We want to be your partner. And Kaylee, I don't know that there was any luck involved. I think the passion with which you forced us into working with your school was well deserved. I think, you know, you are an example of somebody that genuinely goes the extra mile, and there was, you know, everything in there around how you were going to use it was exactly what we wanted to understand more. So I think you've done yourself a disservice there, Kaylee. It was very well earned.
In true Yorkshire style, tried to get out for note. That's what I did. But no, it was all true. I said we had to write, like a bid, and we wrote a bid, and like Pocket Talk chose us, and I think there were 6 schools that were chosen. Ours being one of them, and we feel very, very privileged to be on this journey with Pocket Talk. And I still speak to Pocket Talk monthly, maybe even more than that, where I talk about what's going well, what's not going well. I think I was very clear from the get-go that, similar to what you were saying earlier, Darren, this was never going to be a device that they carry around with them and they use in every lesson. I was very set on that not being the case, because I don't want our children to become reliant on AI. I don't want our children to become reliant on not being able to have conversations like this and use their hand gestures and being able to laugh when it's appropriate. And they need to learn all of this stuff. And unfortunately, a Pocket Talk isn't going to do that. But what it does do is remove certain barriers, gives us the correct language, gives us the correct terms for things, and allows them to feel represented in their own mother tongue, which, you know, that should be the most important thing that we do.
And I have to say, listening to you, Kaylee, if I think about all of the schools that we work with, I think what's really interesting to me is that everywhere uses it slightly differently. So we don't actually have any one school where I think somebody walks around 100% of the time with a Pocket Talk. But we have some schools where, you know, the struggle was actually with parents. You know, we're really finding it difficult to involve parents in the learning journey. We're really, you know, finding that something that we can't bridge. And so that's what they use it for. We've got other schools where, you know, the teachers are using it to actually bring other children in so that, you know, you can connect it to a speaker. So where there's classes with large amounts of EAL, they're actually connecting it to a speaker, the teacher's using it, so the child isn't using it, but it creates a more inclusive classroom. We've got other schools where they're using it for admin, onboarding, form filling, you know, all of that. And so I think that's right. It really depends on, and I think this is what we've learned, which, you know, we don't work in a school every day, is that it's not really a one size fits all. There will be different barriers and different challenges, and that really depends on what school you're in.
I think that's really important, isn't it? Part of that toolkit of strategies that you can use. And I was thinking the other day we had for parents' evenings, and children are immersed within language within school. They hear it all the time. But often if you're a parent, you've just come over and you're anxious as well. Actually, you don't have that opportunity that your children do to be immersed in language. You've got to be deliberate. So having a clear communication, you know, a school has got a tool like Pocket Talk that you can talk, you can communicate, you can get your concerns and worries across as someone new. Actually, that's fascinating. And I can see that there's opens up so many opportunities because of that as well.
We've used it at parents' evenings. We've used it at pairing meetings. There was something that happened only a couple of weeks ago where I was on the phone to a parent. I'm being honest, I didn't realise that they didn't speak English as a first language, and I ended up using the Pocket Talk down the phone, and it became like something at the UN almost, where I'm trying to get these communication barriers removed, but. We haven't got it perfect because, as you know, in schools are very difficult, and the priorities change all the time. I mean, it's always a priority, but other things end up becoming more emergent, more urgent. So, but we have used it with parents, and we have used it at parents' evenings, and it's always available to year leaders. It's not just teachers; it's available to year leaders. And anyone, our school knows that we have it, and if they need it, they will come and use it. And we've kind of got a really nice relationship going on with it, where we know where they are, we know what to do with them. I've trained up certain members of staff on how to use them. But to be fair, the autonomy comes mainly with the children. The children are at first were using them for maybe 75% of the lessons, and then they'd bring it back to me throughout the day saying, oh, for the next 2 lessons I know that I'm not going to use it. And it became another tool of, like I used the phrase before, graduating from it, where they've gone from using it a lot to barely using it. And that's the best, because we don't want children, especially as they go into Key Stage 4 and sit in their exams. Unfortunately, it's not approved by JCQ yet, and I know that's something that Pocket Talk is looking at doing. Yeah. But we can't be relying on these for exams. But they could be at some point. So that's something that I know Pocket Talk are working with. But because of that, we are ensuring really that they do graduate from them as soon as possible, and that they're only used when for those odd words and odd sentences and things.
So we've talked really about lots of different ideas in terms of those language barriers. But I wonder, when was your light bulb moment where you saw Pocket Talk really stick? A moment where you've seen that student's potential was just out of reach because the words didn't quite land. So I'd love to hear from both of you, like, just why you found Pocket Talk to be a tool, maybe not just in education, because you alluded to like the healthcare sector and other sectors where you've seen big changes as well.
There's definitely there's one story that absolutely comes to mind. So we have worked with a number of schools, and not long after I joined the business, I was introduced to a school that we work with who actually have gone on to win sort of innovation awards, and they're really just a lovely bunch, and they're called Aston Clinton, and they're in Buckinghamshire. And I was trying to figure it out too. You know, might not look it, but it's been a long time since I was in a school environment, and you know, I couldn't quite get my own head around why would it be useful. So I spoke to the school, and they told me a story. They basically had a Bulgarian girl come into the school, and she was in really early ages, like year 1. And she didn't speak any English. And essentially, she was only going to school once a week because it was too much. She really didn't know what was going on. And the biggest thing was that she couldn't quite get her head around, was she going to be there for a day? Was it overnight? Like, there was a lot of anxiety around, my parents have dropped me off, I don't know what anybody is saying, nobody in the school speaks Bulgarian. It just wasn't comfortable. And so they contacted us prior to me joining. They already had a Pocket Talk, and they'd explained to her that what school is and what would happen, and they sort of graduated her from 1 day a week to coming every day a week. And she was using the Pocket Talk one day in one of her lessons, and she put it down, and she looked up, and she just spoke in English, and it basically, her first English word ended up being cat, and she wanted to talk about this cat, but she didn't want to do it using the Pocket Talk. And you know, it was this moment of, we're actually communicating with her now, and she, you know, and I remember speaking to the teacher where it had happened, and you know, now she does, similar to yours, Kaylee, she doesn't use it anymore because, you know, she's comfortable and she knows what's going on. And I think that is the story that always stands out for me, because I think it's so easy certainly in my, a lot of my conversations are, well, where is the funding? And, who pays for it? And what's the red tape? And do we like AI or don't we? And, a lot of the conversations I have seem to be there. And then when I bring myself back to, Aston Clinton and that little example, that's the why. That's why you do it, because that little girl would just not have been able to communicate with anybody. And that's what makes it worthwhile.
And it's a satisfaction, isn't it?
It is. That's exactly the right word. It is the satisfaction that it's meaningful.
Yeah. And I wonder, looking back, Kaylee, if you was there a time where you thought, actually, almost prior Pocket Talk or even post now you're using it, was there a time where you wish you had a tool like that, and how it would have given a child a voice using the language to communicate, to support that?
Yeah, definitely. When, like I was alluding to earlier, when I think about my class, my GCSE class of 22, those boys in particular who really wanted to do well and to show their parents, yes, it was the right choice bringing us here, and yes, I can speak English. I really wish that we'd have been able to have them then. But I feel quite fortunate, Jess, because when you're a teacher, you get these little sparks of joy all the time, and that's what makes being a teacher very rewarding, because it is hard work. It's the hardest job in the world, and I mean, I feel like I've aged a lifetime in the 5-6 years that I have been a teacher. But it's those moments that make you realise why you're doing it. And I don't find myself, aspirational. I just really, really care. I'm so child-centred. But I get those sparks of joy every day. And when I think about the Pocket Talk, I have a million examples of, I mean, that's hyperbolic, but I have lots and lots of examples of when the Pocket Talk's been used and I've gone, yes, we've done it. I can't just narrow it down to one. I mean, the one about the family, that was good. One of my colleagues was using it with a learner who got dumped straight into year 11 because of his age, and he couldn't speak English. And she was teaching him an Inspector Calls, one of the GCSE texts, and they were able to have a conversation, a really heavy discussion about how women were treated in Edwardian society, and how did that happen? And I remember her coming to me going, I've just nearly cried in front of my year 11 class. We were able to speak to each other. And although he wasn't speaking in English, they were able to communicate through the device. And he got it. He got a concept, and that's what we can't replace. Remember that when language is more than just words, but he was able to understand a concept, a theme of how women were treated in the Edwardian times, which, when you can't speak English, that's the last thing that you care about. But he did it, and he tried it, and that just goes to show how much that teacher cared about him and getting that right. So I have these sparks and moments of joy all the time in school, especially when you teach in a deprived area. But the Pocket Talk has been an asset to that as well.
Amazing. Well, up until now, we've all been very good teachers and have been very child-centric, which, is brilliant. It's what we trained to do. But it occurred to me sort of, especially as Kaylee was talking then, that actually a lot of children, they do want to succeed. They are ready to graduate from the Pocket Talk. I was in school teaching today, and I had a Spanish native speaker in my lesson, brand new to the country. They were doing a research project. So I said to him, if you want to research in Spanish, then please do, that's not a problem. And he said, no, I would like to try in English first. And I was like, perfect. So I think, it's very easy to forget that sometimes, all of the time, the children do want to try. They do want to do it in English first and then turn to the tools if they need them. So what I'm really interested in is how we can use the tools with parents, because as we kind of talked about 10-15 minutes ago, that is quite often one of the biggest barriers that we have. I had, again, another conversation. I talk too much in school, I think, because another conversation I had today was with a couple of teachers, and it was a case of, are we too old to learn another language now? And I think that's a universal concern, and I think a lot of people think, oh, I can't learn another language now, it's too difficult. So I think, you know, parental reluctance is quite common. It's certainly something that I've experienced, and again, I've been lucky enough to be able to email, you know, shoot off an email in Chinese to the Chinese parents, and that's not a problem. But I'm wondering, I suppose, Kaylee, again, specifically for you, but Jess, you've probably got some stories as well about whether you've seen an improvement in parental engagement, in parental involvement since introducing Pocket Talk.
Yeah, I mean, we still have a long way to go with that. I think all schools are concerned about parental engagement for numerous reasons, and we still have a long way to go. We haven't had the Pocket Talk. I don't think we've had it a year yet. I think we're maybe coming up to a year.
Wow.
And in the less than a year that we've had it, I've been very careful, like a research project. I've actually had it as my performance development in school alongside all of the other things, and I've been carefully considering which parts I really want to focus on. Now, parental engagement has always been a focus, but we're trying to get it in at parents' evenings, and we're trying to get it in at teacher meetings. I'd like to say that it's been a success, but I don't have like hard up evidence to say otherwise. I mean, as a school, we are constantly trying to communicate and constantly trying to ensure that barriers are removed. We have like coffee mornings with parents as well, and the Pocket Talk's been available to use if necessary. As Deputy Senko, we've been working closely with the other Senkos in the trust, and really putting a profile on EAL. I think when it comes to parent engagement, rather than directing straight at the parent, we've looked at a bigger picture of making like learner passports, like proficiency level passports, and phoning parents and asking more about them, basically just asking more about the parents, the learners, and getting a real valuable passport together which tells us their proficiency levels in speaking, reading, listening, because as we know, children can be excellent speakers. Maybe they can be it's not fluent, is it? I've forgotten what the levels are now, but they can be maybe acquisition B in speaking, but then maybe less so in reading, for example. So directly used with parents, we have done, but we are almost taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of how we can really pinpoint what it is that we need to do going forward, rather than just having all of these devices available. We want to make them as efficient as possible.
No, absolutely, that makes sense.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're all right. Go for it.
I was only going to add that I think, you know, with the Pocket Talk, I think the feedback that I hear, and I've got views on what it could be used for, but I think if we stick, what is it actually being used? One of the things that I think comes up a lot, and this isn't even just people that we work with. This is more broader than Pocket Talk. So if we take the Pocket Talk out of it and we just talk about when is the need there, when we're at shows like BET or the Schools and Academy show, LearnTech, we go to all of those and we obviously speak to lots of people while we're there. When it comes to parents, I think there's usually three things that I hear the most. I think the first one is support with children with English as an additional language who potentially also have additional needs as well. So, ADHD, whether they need help with, maybe they're dyslexic, maybe they in their own language, perhaps they might be slightly less proficient than they should be in their own language in certain things, and they're developmentally, they need additional support. Having those conversations with parents of EAL children is incredibly difficult, because often the feedback that I hear is that it's either it doesn't go well because they think you're criticizing because it's lost in translation somewhere, or it just doesn't really happen to the extent that it needs to, where the result is that the child actually does get that additional support. And the additional support is nothing to do with language. The additional support could be, it could be a plethora of things depending on what that child's needs are. But that is something that I hear consistently, is trying to break down that conversation where a parent needs to get more involved beyond the language, but the language is stopping you from being able to talk about those things. The other thing I hear a lot is around culture. So, I think, we often talk about equity and inclusion, and we kind of list off these differences, and language, of course, is a really obvious one. But, a lot of children that come into schools with English, English learning requirements or English language requirements, maybe have come from schools that operate totally differently, have different discipline systems, have different values within the school, have different routines within the school, different expectations, whatever that is. But culturally, it's not just language, but to access discussing what the differences are, and you need to be able to communicate. And so I hear an overwhelming amount of teachers, when I talk to teachers, sort of saying, actually, sometimes it's just about talking to parents about what it means to be in a school in the UK, what it means to have a card that has money on it for lunch, what it means to provide a balanced diet, and what that looks like, and what foods shouldn't really be going in your child's packed lunchbox every day, or what it means to have a uniform, and those things that I think we often might take for granted. Those are some of the conversations that need to be had. And I think overwhelmingly, I do hear teachers saying that would be really helpful to be able to just have that conversation. And I think the final one is when, I know there's a lot that I hear where the student does the translating. And
Yes.
there's some funny stories here, which where the teacher's saying something and it's maybe not the most positive thing, and child translates, and mum or whoever the caregiver is, yeah, good, and teacher's like, not sure that's how you should have responded to what I just said. How you haven't heard that, and it's just removing the child from the translation role to be able to have a direct conversation. I think they are not, and it is anecdotal. I know that, but that the volume I hear those things is staggering.
So can I then just ask, because I think that's a really interesting point, and I've experienced that a lot, where the child has been mediator. And you've then stepped in and gone, actually, no, that's not what I said, because I speak your language, but you didn't know that. But how, if we pick a language that I don't speak, let's say Urdu, for example. Let's say I've got some parents who speak Urdu. They are fluent in their first language. They know it probably better than their child does. If I don't speak it, how can I trust that Pocket Talk is actually getting across what I want to say? Because I've got no way to fact check that.
It's a really good question. I'm so glad you asked. And do you know what? I don't get asked this very much in education, I have to say. When I work with
the linguist to ask.
Darren, I don't, but I'm glad you asked, because I tell you where I do get asked this every single day is healthcare. That is something that I get asked every single day. And so what we've done is we've actually added a feature to the Pocket Talk. Well, we've added two features. The first one is that everything is written so that you can see the input text. And the second thing we've done is we've added a reverse translation. I think this is probably about as techie as I'm going to get on this podcast. And not because I'm avoiding it, because I'm just not techie. So the way the Pocket Talk works is it takes speech, and first of all, it turns that speech into text. The text then goes to the language model to be translated into another language in text form. And then the device turns that text form into speech. So that's basically how it works.
Okay.
If you think about other people that do this, maybe some free providers, one of the biggest reasons that you get poor accuracy in translation is often not because the translation's bad. It's because it hasn't heard you correctly, or it's lost the context. And the reason it hasn't heard you correctly, or it's lost the context, is because it's not solely built to take what you've said and turn it into text, or because it hasn't got an AI level running over the top of it going, does that sentence make sense in the language you said it in? Now, we do both of those things. So that really sort of gives you a much better opportunity for accuracy. The other thing that we do is we don't do any bridging. So this is widely used in large language model translation. I think, Darren, this is your example at the beginning where you said one thing and then you're like, that's not what I said. Sometimes that happens because you sort of stick, in a lot of circumstances, English in the middle. And you go, I'm going to go from that language to that language. But the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to go from that language to English to that language, and then back again. And of course, you're going to lose the sentiment of what you're saying. So if there's language availability on the Pocket Talk, it will be because we do it directly. But I think the one thing that answers your question is, if I speak into the device, it will translate what I'm saying. Now, it's going to do that sort of automatically.
Wenn ich in das Gerät spreche, übersetzt es, was ich sage.
But what I can now do is take that German translation and run it back through, not what I said in the beginning, just the output, and I can press reverse it.
When I speak into the device, it translates what I say.
That is exactly what was in German, because that's now not what I said. It's not my translation. That is a translation of what the person understood. So you will always be able to sense check, not what did I say, which you can see on the screen, what did it hear me say, but what has that person heard? And I think that's something that, in healthcare is used a lot, and it could also be used in education, and Darren specifically, you could use it too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even when you're speaking with native English speakers, we all know that children don't always hear what you've said. There is a difference between those two things. So absolutely, no, that's good. And I will confirm for any non-German speakers who are listening, I'm impressed with the German. The German that's coming out of the device is clear, it's concise, it's good German. You're winning me over. I'm not sure I'm quite there yet, but I'm being won over.
Tough crowd, James.
It's fascinating. I'm absolutely fascinated by it. As someone, who struggled with MFL and speaking at GCSE, I think this is a huge element. And for those who are listening back to this as a podcast, definitely I would recommend not only watching the video, where you can see Jess demonstrating it as well, but also going to pockettalk.com where you can see this in action and go through. And I think on the website, there are three things. It says secure, accurate, and ease. And I think you've explained those really clearly in that technical explanation you did there. But I want to step back a little bit, because I'm really interested by this culture, equity, and inclusion that you were talking about. And it's clear that this multilingual classrooms are around us. And if anything, it's going to the fact of ease of use between being able to travel or even being able to communicate online. So the question almost comes, how can we build a sustainable, inclusive approach to supporting EAL students at every stage of their journey? Where does Pocket Talk come in to help scaffold that learning? And almost what would your wish be for that future environment? I'll start with you, Kaylee, and then Jess, you can build from that.
I think, what I was saying earlier, I want to be able to train up ECTs and ITTs and have them prepared for that. They are going to see learners in a classroom, which are EAL, learners who are SEND, learners who are pupil premium, and just have a toolkit prepared to be able to deal with that. Now, I know that we are specifying with the EAL, but the Pocket Talk, I'm trying to see if it can bridge gaps in other ways. How can it work with our dyslexic learners? How can it work with other learners with particular SEND needs? No one is saying that Pocket Talk is going to cure or fix or anything like that, because it can, because nothing will ever replace the human interaction and the human language. Same with learning language. We all know that it expands your brain and it makes you more clever to learn multiple languages. But an inclusive classroom to me is when you have a quality first teacher in front of you who just has access to as many tools as possible, and that a school is willing to. I want to be careful that I'm not talking about. We haven't got loads of money, have we? Of course, but schools being willing to take the plunge and to look at what resources are available. And can Pocket Talk in the future replace some current tools that currently run, which are more expensive or perhaps aren't as as efficient? I think that's one of my big questions and question marks around it, where I'm seeing tools being used in schools that aren't as good as the Pocket Talk, but because we're already invested in that said program, we're unable to then look at other ones. It was interesting just seeing the reverse technology. I have never used that, but how I have used it is to get the buy-in from the children. I remember opening it up when I got them all delivered in these beautiful fancy boxes. And I said to the children, do you want to know what this is? And they were all, yeah, what is it? Because it looked like a phone. And because most of my learners, like I've said, 49.9% speak EAL, we were doing it then. So I was going out the room, saying something into it, running back in the room, going, what's it saying? And we did the reverse technology ourselves. They were like, Miss, that's amazing. And then I ended up showing it to a couple of our teachers who speak different languages. And I said, can you tell me how accurate that is? And they were floored by how accurate it was. They honestly were. So although I've not used that particular function, I tried to quality assure it myself against other staff who do speak different languages.
It sounds to me like that's a better way to do it, actually.
Yeah, we were looking at how it could work with those children. But yeah, inclusive education is everyone's absolute priority. And Pocket Talk is not going to fix inclusivity, but is it going to give some representation? Yes. Is it going to help children have more autonomy? Yes. And if we're not wanting to invest in that, then you have to kind of question what is the reason? What is the reason? I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely, that's a brilliant answer. That's excellent. Just if you are watching live, you may have noticed that James has dropped out. I think we've overwhelmed him with our amazing technologically linguistic knowledge. Or he's just had a power cut, as per the text I've just received.
Probably. I had to think about James's question, Darren, and I think there's two ways to answer it, because I think the first way is I listened to Kaylee and I listened to other teachers, and I think Kaylee hit the nail on the head. I think Kaylee, you said something like, it's not about aspirations. I just want to do the right thing and I just want to teach. And I don't think there's a teacher that I've met that doesn't have that ethos. And so you've just got this group of people that are passionate and they're capable of teaching, and that's what they want to do. And I think you've then got this group of children who are eager to learn. And I think our job has to be to take away some of the stress and the admin and the barriers so that those two groups can come together and do that. I think to answer it maybe more as a takeaway, I think my wish would be that there was more awareness and confidence in innovation and technology within schooling. I'd like to see more open-mindedness within the decision makers. I'd like to see, a higher propensity to adopt new. I think that would be encouraging, and I think it would help people. I think I'd like to see the government do a better job of making people aware of the funding that is available to support with things like high levels of EAL students in classrooms. Kaylee's got nearly 50%. We work with a school called Parkfield, 100% EAL at this point. And so I'd like to see, there be more done to make funding accessible, or at least give people the knowledge of where it is, because it is out there. And I think, I'm not sure it's always easy to find, is what I would say my feedback from teachers is often become. And I think holistically, it's beyond the classroom. Next week, I'm actually with the DWP doing a panel discussion on people getting into work, because it's not just the classroom, it's the parents, and it's how do the parents integrate themselves. And I think it's more broadly, if there's tools that allow people to integrate and become really kind of value adding, we should definitely do that. And I think if I had a wish list, I'd love those things to happen.
I think that's a really important thing to remember, isn't it? Because, as teachers, we kind of assume that people get to 18 and then they just kind of stop. But all of these EAL kids that we are sending out of our schools, off to university, they are going to become the doctors, the solicitors,
the future. It's the economic future, isn't it? We have to look after them because they're going to look after us.
Exactly. And so, it is really important that we make sure that while we've got them, we provide all of the tools that we can to facilitate their learning. But then also those tools don't go away when they need help filling out a form, filling in their tax, because that's a nightmare anyway.
Well, the conversation next week is specifically around interviews, and I wonder how many interviews are set up to enable somebody whose English isn't their whose English is their second language, but they have the skills and the experience and the accreditation to do the job. That's a conversation next week. So you're right.
Yeah, and that's really exciting. I feel like for Pocket Talk as a company, there's a really interesting future ahead, not just in the education sector, but for everybody. I do think that's really exciting. I'd
encourage anybody who has listened to get in touch with us. You can email me, jessica@pockettalk.com. I'd love to hear from you, or you can get in touch with us through the website. I've got a lovely team, people in the UK who, Kaylee, I'm sure you know I'm talking about Matt as well, like some really good people on the ground who know what they're doing within education, and I think that they can really help.
Yeah. And so, Kaylee, for you, just kind of, I'm aware that we've hit 7 o'clock, so just kind of as we start to round up, because this could still go on all night, quite frankly. I'm having a great time chatting to both of you. But Kaylee, for you, how are you seeing your work with Pocket Talk progress? Now that you've kind of started to instill it, now that you've hit the ground running with it, I suppose, what are your next steps with it?
Yeah, so my next steps are to start looking closer into the classroom and seeing how EAL is being met, how the outcomes are being met, how it looks to teachers as well. Is everyone getting enough support, teachers and children? We have to remember that as teachers, our overload is huge too, and we want to make sure that everyone feels supported. So I want these tools to become an asset to the classroom that reduces teacher load, not puts any additional pressure, just make sure that everyone is able to work together and support one another. I want to be looking closer into classrooms and seeing that the support's where it needs to be for our learners. And most importantly, that they're happy. They're just the children that are using them are happy. The children that are using them are graduating from them, which we already have seen a lot of success stories. And the children just have that resilience and self-esteem, which we care about so much.
That's brilliant. That's, as teachers, that's just what we want, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. All of that, that's the dream. And whatever tools that we can get our hands on, I think, are well worth using to get there.
We've actually started putting them around the trust now. So as a school within the trust, we're starting to look around. Obviously, our school got the bid, but as we've got the bid, there's not less EAL learners, but I'd say that they're graduating from it. So we're now putting them into other trust schools, and we're trying to be as efficient as possible with these tools, getting them around and seeing who they actually do benefit. So I do, if anyone is listening with EAL, do genuinely look into it. It can even be on a trust level, that maybe the trust buy a couple of the devices, and then you work out from there, because it also might, although it does work, it also might not fit for your classroom, and that's okay. There's no failing within that. I haven't used them personally as much as I thought I would, but other colleagues have, and that's what we've been doing, just sharing them around, having an open discussion about them.
Brilliant. And then, Jess, from your point of view, Kaylee alluded earlier to this idea of you guys approaching the JCQ to see whether we can have them as exam accessibility options. What is the future for Pocket Talk looking like right now? What have you all got planned?
So I think the future for Pocket Talk is it's all the things that we've just discussed, and continuing to do what we're doing. But there are some exciting things on the horizon. The first one being exactly that. We've seen from the schools that we work with that children having access to Pocket Talk are attaining, higher grades now than they were before, because their understanding or their context, or to Kaylee's, I understand the theme, or I've got a better understanding of what's being asked of me, is improving. but to Kaylee's point, they can't be used in an exam setting. And so we know that things like scanning pens and reader pens, and there are other tools that are being able to be used. And so we are exploring, can we do more about that? But I think the most exciting thing that we're doing is that we're taking the feedback from the people that we work with, and we're listening to where are the barriers and how is the Pocket Talk using them? And what we're starting to learn is that actually there might be other ways to do it than on this piece of hardware. It might be simultaneous translation because I've got to do a Zoom call. Kaylee alluded earlier to having to speak to a parent. They weren't in front of her. Well, actually, our business is translation. It's not really the device, or our business is breaking down the barrier. And so our duty is to make sure that we continue to innovate, to make sure that we've got the right tools available for the different scenarios, because there are many. And so I think we will be launching 2 new software solutions later this year that tackle various barriers that we know are currently available. And I think what's exciting is that as we grow and we work with more schools and more people like Kaylee, we're just getting a much more intensive understanding. And we can step away from assuming we know where the barriers are and actually designing for the barriers themselves, which I think just changes everything about what we do. And I think, that's what I would look out for. Can Pocket Talks be used in exam settings? Are they going to be, more of a tool in education specifically? And what other innovations do we bring out that help to make conversations with people who don't speak the same language as you as natural and accessible as possible?
That's brilliant. And I think, sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, Darren, we cannot end the call without knowing whether or not we've won you over. Wow. Just question, but I've got to...
No, that is fair. That is right. So let me see. I think it's great. I really do. All joking aside, I think this is a fantastic solution to something that is a barrier to education. We know that we have these huge proportions of EAL using children. We know that quite often their parents have brought them to the UK for a better chance at a better life.
Yeah.
And education is one of the key ways for them to have that. And so I think, we as teachers owe it to those children to provide them with every single tool that is going to make sure that we get there. I feel like I was just thinking, Jess, as you were talking about the evolution of devices. And, I remember I've been a geeky linguist my entire life. I remember for like my 9th or 10th birthday, I got an old school translator. So it was like that long and it came with preset phrases. That you just roll through and then you tapped them. And, in 30 something years, to get from there to where we are now, I think is brilliant. And to hear that you're still innovating, that you're still finding ways to make it, yes, accessible to the children, yes, accessible to the parents, yes, accessible to the schools, because, we haven't got very much money, budgets are... and so I think it's a great thing. Even better though than winning me over is winning over Paul. Now, Paul and I chat quite frequently, and I know that he can quite often be a hard person to win over. So the fact that you've won him over is a perfect thing. I think send me a free one and I might think about it.
Yeah.
But no, I will say again, thank you very much to Pocket Talk for sponsoring this, and thank you to all of the 200 people who have been listening over both platforms. I will say, yes, I have been won over. I do, being completely honest, I do think that we need to start making sure that we have conversations with the children about what AI can and can't do, what it should and shouldn't do. But I don't think we should let those conversations scare us from using some of the stuff that is as ethically sourced as Pocket Talk tends to be. I think the ethics will always be my bugbear. But from everything that you said about how you gather your data, I'm completely happy to say ethically I'm okay with it. And so I would absolutely have one in my classroom. You have succeeded in winning me over.
I suspect that's more to do with you, actually.
Oh, well, do you know what? I could keep going all night because, as anybody who's spoken to me ever in my life will know, this is one of my favourite things to talk about. But I do not want to keep either of you from your lovely sunny evenings. So I would like to thank you, Kaylee, for joining us this evening, for your amazing insights into how you've used these things in the classroom. It's one thing to hear from the company. It's one thing to hear the sales pitch, which, Jess, I'm not saying is what you did, because we'll come to that in a second, but it's another completely to hear how it's authentically being used in the classroom. And I think you said that you guys were lucky to get to the Pocket Talks. I think your children are lucky to have you to fight for them, to provide that technology. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity as well. I mean, we all know that education is the leveling of our society, and we have to invest in these things. And I know it can be tough, but as someone who's trialed and tested, it does genuinely make a difference. So thank you.
No, thank you. And Jess, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to hear from somebody so passionate about not just the product, but about the inclusion, about breaking down the barriers, about having that linguistic parity. And I love that you've been able to take that into Pocket Talk and kind of produce a product that clearly is working in all the partner schools that you've worked with, and hopefully will be working in the schools of our 200 listeners very, very soon. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Teacher Talk Radio. I've actually really enjoyed this.
It's been great. I've loved speaking to both of you. And you know what, if either of you ever want to join me on the Saturday morning for my show, then please just drop me a line, because I would be more than happy to have either one of you on the show.
Oh, thanks, Darren.
My thanks once again to Pocket Talk for sponsoring us this evening. My thanks to James, who has indeed had a power cut across his entire village. So he hasn't been able, the downside to technology always likes to remind us that it's in charge, doesn't it? It always wants to say, no, don't be too positive about me, because things still will go wrong. But I would like to thank him for all of his hard work on the show, and I'm only sorry that he couldn't be here to finish it off, because I know he was so excited about chatting about the AI, particularly with both of you. And finally, thank you to all 200 of you who have viewed in over our multiple platforms, and of course everybody who will be listening back or watching us back, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, something like that. We're basically everywhere. Teachers Talk Radio is everywhere. So once again, thank you. I have been Darren Lester. I will hopefully see many of you on Saturday morning for the next Saturday breakfast show. But until then, do enjoy your evenings. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused